Hello everyone and welcome back to the World War II Solitaire board game channel. Today we are going to take a closer look at Freezing Inferno, a war game which is currently on its last stretch on Kickstarter. This preview will be from a solo perspective, since this is a solitaire wargame channel. Freezing Inferno is a two-player game which also features a solo mode. A very basic solo mode has been included in the prototype copy, which I received from Princeps Games. So keep that in mind, that it is a prototype copy. The publisher has confirmed that an improved solo version will be included in the final copy of the product, as well as the current solo system. We're going to talk deeper about the solo system further on, but let's start with the game itself. Freezing Inferno is a hex encounter war game covering the invasion of Finland by the Soviet Union in 1939 to 1940, or as is known in Finland, Talvisota. According to the publisher, the game is of medium complexity and a game will take somewhere between 4 to 6 hours to play. The solo system can be used to control the faction of the player's choice. This is great, since that means that we can decide whether we want to play as the Finns or if we want to play as Russians. Victory conditions are simple. For the Soviet Union to win, the player needs to control 2 out of the 3 key cities in Finland. That's Helsinki, Oulu and Petsamo. While also controlling at least 5 of its own cities back in the Soviet Union. The game consists of 8 turns, and by the end of the last turn, Finland will win if they can prevent the Soviet Union from achieving this objective. So I like this idea because this means that if you are the kind of player who likes to defend and, trying to hold the line, you should play as the Finns. But if you like to play in an aggressive manner, attacking, well, you're going to want to play as the Russians. This map has 11 types of different terrain. The terrain will make it easier or harder for the occupier to attack or defend, but it will generally be positive for the occupier. Different kinds of terrain can also require different amount of movement points to enter. A mountain hex, for example, requires a staggering 6 movement points to enter, and a clear hex only requires 3 movement points. And while we're talking about the map, I just want to mention that the finished game will come with a 2-sided map. The main side is one that I have, and the optional side as graphic will be a more traditional war game, as you can see here. I got a PDF from Princeps Games, so that's the one I'm showing right here. Also note that as I am recording this, the next stretch goal on the campaign is going to be a free neoprene game mat. And that's going to come with one of these pages, one of these sides. So either the more traditional wargame style or the more board game-like style. And that's going to be decided by a vote from everyone who has backed the game. So on the maps, we also have cities and airfields, and the airfields will be your base of operations for your fighters and bomber planes. And as the Soviet player progress into Finland, he is going to want to capture more Finnish airfields to make the most use of his fighter and bomber planes. But of course, also the Finns can capture the Russians' airfields. Capturing cities, however, is the important part, not only for your victory condition to win the game, but also because that will increase your so-called national military capacity. And I'm just going to call that military capacity moving on. Losing cities will also decrease your military capacity. So what is military capacity? When the game starts, Finland will have an income of 28 military capacity, and the Soviet Union will have an income of 29 military capacity. When the turn ends, you will receive whatever your income is. So after the first turn, if you have 28, you will have 28 military capacity funds. So for these funds, you can buy units, you can research using module number 2, and you can lobby for the League of Nations in diplomacy in module number 3. And we're going to discuss the modules a little bit later on when we talked more about the basics of the game. So the game has 7 kinds of units. We have infantry, artillery, tanks, fighter planes, bomber planes, anti-aircraft guns, and headquarter units. Units have an attack value, defense value, and movement value. Artillery and anti-air also have a range. The units are all identical and do not differ between the nations. However, some of the units will have unique traits. For example, the Soviet tanks can run on wheels to increase their movement value from 14 to 20 movement points. Finnish infantry can capture tanks when they defeat Soviet armor. Besides attack value and defense value, units will also have a strength value. The strength value depends on the amount of units in the stacks. All units are normally stacked in stacks of 5 at the beginning of the game, except the AA and HQ units. They start with only 1 in the stack. I say normally because with advanced setup rules, which I would actually recommend using, you can choose to stack your units in 3, 4 or 5. This will make setup a little bit longer, but will also make it way more fun and give the player more control of the situation. The bot will always start with 5 counters in the stacks for the standard units. Strength value can go down all the way to 1, and if it goes lower than that, the unit is destroyed. The strength value is combined with the attack value for the total attack value. So a tank unit, which has an attack value of 5, with 3 counters in the stack, has a strength value 3. The total attack value is then 8. The total defense value of units work the same way as the total attack value. The battle sequence might seem a little bit complex at first, but becomes easy once you have learned how to do it. The battle sequence is as follows. Choose first the corresponding combat result chart, depending if it's a ground-to-ground combat, ground-to-air combat, air-to-air combat, or air-to-ground combat. Calculate the total attack value of the attacker and the total defense value of the defending unit. Roll on the corresponding column on the combat result table. Apply any modifiers from terrain or calendar effects. Apply the result from the corresponding row at the combat results table. If the attacker has losses, they lose the battle, take the losses as specified, and have to retreat where they came from. If the defender has losses, they lose the battle, reduce the strength of the unit by the specified number, and withdraw from the hex where the battle took place. And the attacker now occupies that hex. So to give you an example here, this Soviet tank unit will attack the Finnish infantry unit. The infantry unit is in a forest hex, meaning that the Soviet tank unit's attack roll will be modified by a -1. The Soviet tank has a 5 in attack value, and there's a total of 3 counters, meaning it has a strength of 3. We combine the 5 in attack value and the strength of 3, and we get the total attack value of 8. The Finnish infantry have a defense value of 3, and there are a total of 4 counters, meaning that they have a strength value of 4. So we combine the 3 in defense value and the 4 in strength value, and we get a total of 7 in total defense value. So the attack is an 8 versus 7 defense. So we check that column here on the battle sequence board or resolution board, and we roll a 5. The 5 then turns into a 4 with the modifier from the forest terrain. And that means both the attacker and the defender loses 1 unit, and that also means the attacker has to retreat from the hex that it came from. So the game starts with the player setting up his forces in his nation. As a Finnish player, you will want to be careful to set up too close to the border, since the Soviet player will always start and can easily score quite devastating kills with artillery and bombers if you start too close to the border. You will also have to make sure that all of your units are within 7 unobstructed hexes from an HQ unit. Otherwise, their movement value and total attack and defense value will become half of what it actually is, since it's otherwise considered to be out of supply. After the setup is done, you will roll a d8 and then you will set up the enemy units according to the predetermined setup step. So this is unique for solo mode. This means that you will not know where the enemy units will spawn. They might, for example, go heavy in the north, center or south region. They may also go spread out over the border. And this is a really fun idea as it will let the player play around and experiment with different setups and will also work as a push your luck element. In this specific situation, we see that I have decided to spread my forces pretty evenly, but with a bit of extra focus on the north, as I thought if I would play the Russians, I would try to get the key city in the north as it's rather close to the border. But as we see here, that is not at all what the Russian bot did. The Soviet units are heavily concentrated down in the south, and I can see that in this specific game I'm going to have a really big challenge trying to transport my troops down south for that vital defense. Since there are 8 kinds of starting setups for each enemy, I can see that this will always keep the player on his toes and will give us some game variation. So shown here are the 8 different solo setups for the Soviet forces. Part of setup is also arranging your calendar cards. Like I previously mentioned, the game is played in 8 turns. There is no turn track to keep track of the turns. Instead, we have 8 calendar cards, 1 for each turn. I have to say that this is probably my favorite part of the game. It feels innovative and a perfect way to keep the game exciting and give it excellent replayability. To set up the calendar deck, shuffle 3 cards for each turn and draw one of them randomly face down. This means that we have a total of 24 different calendar cards, but we will only use 8 for each game. The calendar cards give us a nice condensed history lesson and a game effect that is related to that specific real world historical event. At the beginning of a new round, a new calendar card will be turned face up, and that card's effect will begin and it will last for the entire round. Calendar cards are also indicate when it's time for players to gain reinforcements. And let's take a look here at the possible calendar cards for the second turn. Remember that only one of these will be in effect and it will be random. The first example is Battle for Taipale, which will give the Soviet infantry +2 movement points for the entire turn. The second example is the Battle of Folyajevo, which will reduce the Soviet HQ area of supply from 7 to 6 hexes. And the final example here is the USSR is expelled from the League of Nations. And let's go ahead and read this historical note because I like that, being a Finnish Swede. On December 14, 1939, the League of Nations, the international peacekeeping organization formed at the end of World War II, expelled the USSR in response to the Soviets' invasion of Finland. After the invasion, many skilled and trained soldiers and Navy-educated Sweden volunteered, and within a few days, 3 Swedish combat groups counting around 7,000 Swedes formed the volunteer corps. So this will give the Finnish player 6 military capacity. Complexity-wise, I agree with the publisher that this is a medium complexity wargame, and a great thing with this game is that you as a player can modify the complexity by adding or removing some of the models. This could also be done to modify the time that is required to play, which is great since sometimes you might want to play a long game or sometimes you might wish for a shorter game. If you have a little bit more time and looking for a deeper experience, I would recommend use all of the free modules. There are 3 different modules. They all add complexity, but they also add variation, fun, and detail in the game. So let's take a closer look at all of these models. The first model adds weather. This feels like a natural choice for a module in a Winter War game, so I'm glad that the designer decided to include this. The Winter War was of course infamous for its horribly cold weather, which claimed many lives, mostly Russian. In this module, the temperature will affect things like movement. For example, really cold weather might freeze lakes over, meaning some units might be able to move over lakes. The weather also affects movement. For example, foggy weather will make it impossible for air units to operate. The second module is my favorite. It adds technological and tactical improvements. It's kind of like a research module. The different nations have some unique tactical improvements, and the Finns really shine here as all of their unique improvements make their infantry more lethal. You can really turn your Finnish infantry into killing machines, which makes sense if you see the Talvisota kill-death ratio, which was 6-1 for the Finns. So in this module, we will use our military capacity funds, which we discussed earlier, to kind of purchase these researches. And module number 3 introduces diplomacy and represents the influence of Finland and the Soviet Union in the League of Nations. So this will start positively towards the Finnish player and can be further increased for the Finnish player to receive reinforcements towards the end of the game. And the Soviet player can try to lobby to try to stop this from happening and could even make it end with Soviet positive, meaning the Finns will lose one infantry group. This is probably the least intriguing module for me, and I think it might make more sense in a multiplayer game than in a solo game. And to affect this, to lobby for your nation, again, you're going to use military capacity funds. So anyway, we talked about the game now in broad terms, all of it. So now it is time to talk about the solo bot. The solo bot is the number one factor for me. So I gotta admit that I'm a little bit sad to say that there isn't really much that I can tell you here. First of all, the solo bot, which is included in the prototype, is just that. It is a prototype. The finished product will come with 2 solo bots, and it will have the original prototype bot, which we will discuss here, and a second set of solo rules, which are currently under development. I asked the designer about this and can't really say much about it right now. He described this as quite different to original rules, and they will be redefined. The original solo rules are quite far away from an automatic self-dependent bot. I would describe it more as hints and suggestions on how to play two-handed. So this is the only thing so far that has disappointed me a little bit. But again, the solo rules are a prototype only, and we still got to see what Princip Games has in store for us. And I do really hope that they will give us an improved solo mode. Anyway, let me describe how the current prototype bot works, since that will also be included in the finished game. You'll basically follow a simple flow chart with different actions depending on the situation from 1 to 3. I'll show it to you here. So as you're, taking control of the enemy's turn, which will be controlled by the AI, you will follow this 1, 2, 3 for each and every unit. So first, you will take enemy cities. If you can move to an enemy city, do so, and key cities are priorities. So if you cannot move to an enemy city, you will instead do number 2, which is defeat enemy troops. Enemy HQ first, that means my HQ first, and then the bot attacks the lowest defense value with the highest attack unit. And if you can't do that, you go to number 3. Okay, so number 3 means if you can't do number 1 or number 2, you will take an enemy airfield. You will take one of your airfields. And if that is not possible, you will simply move towards the highest valued city of yours, closest to the bot, to make claiming one next turn better possible. So this is basically what you will do. Again, the solo bot will have specific instructions for combat, for its special units, and for each of the 3 modules. But in overall, these are the solo rules, which of course is not a real bot, but rather a guideline on how to play solo two-handed. All in all, I think that this looks like a really cool hex and counter war game tackling the brutal Finnish Winter War. If Princip's Games can develop the solo bot further, I'm sure that this is going to be really cool. But if you are the kind of person who does enjoy playing two-handed, I'm sure that you will be satisfied with the bot that is now available. If you do enjoy more automated bots, as we see in pure solitaire games, you might want to wait on committing to this game until there is more information on the second set of bot rules. And there you have it, guys. This is Freezing Inferno, the new Hex and Counter war game, still available to pre-order on Kickstarter for a few more days. $55. You can find the link to the Kickstarter in the video description. Thank you for watching, as always. If you're not subscribed, I would be very happy if you would subscribe. Linking and commenting on the video also helps me out a lot. Thank you again. See you next time.